In a historic first, former president of the United States and a current presidential candidate on top of that announced his own federal indictment. Joining us now for their take on this monumental day in the history of this great republic, former Watergate special prosecutor Richard Ben-Veniste and legendary Watergate journalist Bob Woodward. Bob, you have interviewed the former president extensively. In 2019, he told you about a nuclear weapons system where he claimed this. Let's take a listen from your interview.
I have built a weapons system that nobody's ever had in this country before. We have stuff that you haven't even seen or heard about. We have stuff that Putin and Xi have never heard about before.
I mean, that's nuts in itself. But now we know he's been charged with retaining these classified documents about U.S. nuclear capabilities. Who knows who got access to them? Who knows who he told about them? So this must not actually be surprising to you.
No. This indictment and the circumstances are a total reflection of his personality. I really think he believes democracy is enemy territory because it's about other people. And he likes everything to be about him. And I think one of the offshoots of this is a test and a grave crisis for the Republican Party.
Yeah.
How is the Republican Party going to deal with this? We all know lots of Republicans. Many are still law and order Republicans. And I think they're going to look at this and they're going to say, wait a minute. And this could begin that snowball going down the mountain because it's so factual, it's so potent. And I thought Jack Smith, what he did today when he praised the FBI was so important. So the Republicans are going to have to go back to Barry Goldwater, who 50 years ago went to Nixon and said, too many lies, too many crimes. And Nixon asked him in a private Oval Office meeting with the Republican leaders in the House and the Senate, well, I know I'm going to be impeached. How will I do in a Senate trial? Now he'd need 34 votes to stay in office. And Goldwater looked at him and said, Mr. President, I've counted, and you have 5 votes. And one of them is not mine.
Right, and you don't have mine. Yeah, it's such a great story. Richard, I want to get your take on something historian Doug Brinkley said today. Let's roll that tape.
I've always thought Ford was right to heal the country pardoning Nixon, but in recent years, I realized it was probably a mistake for the reason that it encourages the arrogance of President Trump, this feeling that he's above the law, that the Constitution doesn't matter, that you can have an authoritarian bent and do anything you want in the United States.
Do you agree? And I think the long view picture of what he's saying is that if actually there had been a trial of Richard Nixon, and maybe he had gone to prison, as many of his co-conspirators did, then maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Well, at least if the timing was different on the pardon. If President Ford had waited until we brought charges, and then Nixon could address the charges either by accepting a pardon or not, at least the charges would be out there and it would be something the public could see. And I agree that this indictment really is a reflection of the former president's arrogance, his disdain for the rule of law, which is so repugnant to people who have worked in law enforcement, who have worked for the Constitution bipartisanly over the years, to see this kind of complete disregard for the rule of law by the president in treating documents which involve the national security of the United States in this cavalier, offhanded, and totally disrespectful way. I don't see how members of his political party can accept this as a leader of the party.
So, Bob, you were talking about, you invoked Goldwater, who obviously had been the Republican Party's nominee for president in '64. So he was the conservative standard bearer, going to Nixon, talking to Nixon. And I'm just wondering, I mean, the modern incarnation of that would be Mitt Romney, very conservative, but Donald Trump doesn't care what Mitt Romney thinks.
He wouldn't let him in.
Right. Is there, I mean, and to be clear, he should. Mitt Romney's a wise man and very conservative. Is there a Goldwater of today that not just Donald Trump, but Kevin McCarthy would listen to?
Well, we're going to have to find him, or the Republican Party is going to have a come to Jesus meeting with itself and say, what are we missing? Leadership, direction, moral definition, which has to be the center of any political party, if I may say. I think this situation is a test for Biden and the Democrats also. I think it's really important. Biden is staying away from this and so forth, but you go back 50 years, the night Nixon announced he was resigning, in the Washington Post newsroom, Ben Bradley, the editor, was running around saying, don't gloat, no gloating, essential. And I was with Ben, we were going down to get something to eat at the Washington Post cafeteria, which was not much, but it was late at night, and the elevator opened, and out stepped a prominent member of the Kennedy family and said, Ben, I came here to celebrate. And Ben almost tackled him, pushing him back in the elevator, and said, no. No celebration, no gloating. And it's very important that the Democrats and those of us in our business not get in any celebration mode.
Yeah, 1974, Kennedy in Washington. I think I could figure out who that was. Maybe.
It was Sergeant Shriver.
It was Sergeant Shriver.
Yes,
I thought it was
right,
Senator Kennedy,
right.
Senator Ted Kennedy.
No.
Do you agree? And you know, you brought the Watergate case, and do you think the Republican Party of the 70s was different from the Republican Party today in terms of?
For all that we know about Nixon, and there was a lot that he did that was wrong, mean-spirited, and unconstitutional, I believe that if he had survived Watergate, wounded but survived, he was not an existential threat to our democracy. I don't believe the same thing about Donald Trump. And I think this is an important step for people to consider how he regarded our national security in the way he treated these documents. And the next thing to come is January 6th, which was a head-on assault against our democracy.
2 investigations coming to a fore on that, including one from Jack Smith. And,
If I may, but 50 years ago, if somebody had said to you, do you think Richard Nixon is an existential threat to democracy, you would have said yes.
No, I would not.
You would not have.
No, I wouldn't have said an existential threat because we could have
That's
survived.
too big a word.
We
I know.
survived. And I'm
threat to
using
democracy, but not an existential one.
I'm using a big word when it comes to Donald Trump.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. 2 legends from of the era and of today as well. Richard Ben-Veniste and Bob Woodward. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Good to see you, sir.